Hello everyone, my name is Keith, amateur radio call WD4PTJ. I came across a video on YouTube entitled Why Starlink Mini Destroys Amateur Radio. I actually came across this video because Josh on Ham Radio Crash Course did a video responding to this video. And so I thought I wanted to put my 2 cents worth in also. So like I said, the name of the video is Why Starlink Mini Destroys Amateur Radio, and the guy's channel is called Grunt Proof. And in the video, he's out on a mountaintop, standing next to his pickup truck, and he's holding an HT, and he's talking about how he's got 4 or 5 repeaters programmed into that HT, and he can't hit any of them from there. So his point is that ham radio is not that useful to him right there, so he's going to use Starlink in order to send messages. Okay, the first thing I kind of want to respond to is that by saying the Starlink destroys amateur radio, he seems to think that everybody that got into amateur radio got into it for the same reason that he did. And looking at his channel, it appears that, I don't know whether he calls himself a prepper or not, but it appears that he is a prepper, the type of videos that he's made. And I'm not saying anything's wrong with that. But in other words, that's what he got into amateur radio for. There's a great many of us, amateur radio is a hobby. And that's also the reason that we've gotten into it. Now, I've made videos before about whether amateur radio is a hobby and amateur radio being useful in emergency communications. And just because I happen to consider it a hobby doesn't mean, we want to get this out of the way, doesn't mean that I don't believe that it's useful in emergency communications. I've made videos backing up that point that I believe that it is. But in other words, if he's kind of implying that Starlink's just going to do away with amateur radio, well, what about those of us that consider it a hobby? I don't think that people like me that like to chase DX are going to give up amateur radio, give up chasing DX because of Starlink. I don't think the people who go out and set up for POTA are going to quit setting up for POTA because Starlink exists. So with that aspect out of the way, the hobby aspect of amateur radio and how I don't think that Starlink's going to kill that, let's talk about the emergency communication aspect and what he's trying to do. So he's trying to hit a repeater from there with nothing but what appears to be a cheap Chinese handy-talkie, and it wouldn't matter whether it was a name brand or a cheap Baofeng or not. But he's using a handy-talkie with the stock rubber duck mic on it, and putting out 5 watts probably, and is complaining because it doesn't hit the repeater. And he's standing right next to his pickup truck. I mean, there's a number of things I can say here that would improve his chances of hitting a repeater from there. First off, to begin with, we all know it's line of sight, so no matter what he does, if the line of sight won't enable him to hit a repeater from that location, I mean, yes, it's not going to work. But he's not helping his chances with nothing but a handheld radio out in the middle of what looks to be nowhere and standing next to his truck. Maybe if he had a 50-watt mobile radio in that truck with an antenna on the truck, a mag mount or something, might increase his chances of hitting those repeaters that he's talking about. Or even if he had a Slim Jim antenna that he could throw up in a tree, he's standing right next to some trees there, and he could get that Slim Jim up 15, 20 feet or maybe even more. I've done a video of a Slim Jim antenna like that, and even with just the 5-watt handy-talkie, hooking it up to that, you know, height is might in the world of radio like that. And if he could get that antenna up a little higher, it would improve his chances of hitting a repeater. But he thinks all he's going to be able to do it with is a simple handheld 5-watt radio with the stock rubber duck antenna, and he's going to hit a repeater off in the distance. That's just not a very good chance right there. And he mentions that amateur radio is expensive. You know, I guess in other words, he doesn't say it, but I guess he's insinuating that to get anything other than that handy-talkie that he has would be expensive. But yet he can put out the money for the Starlink system and pay the subscription to that. I think he could have got a 50-watt mobile in that truck for less than what he paid for that Starlink. Then there's this question of how dependable is that Starlink going to be? You're depending on an infrastructure there that you don't control. And it could be shut down on purpose. It could go down because of technical reasons, and that has happened. You're dependent on the satellites. You're dependent on the ground station that the satellites are going to communicate back down to. You're dependent on a lot of infrastructure there that could fail. Whereas with amateur radio, you're just dependent on your radio, perhaps a repeater system there. You know, you're dependent on more infrastructure, it seems like, that could fail. This kind of reminds me of the other video I done about the guy who was kind of saying the same thing, bashing amateur radio and emergency communication, because he was going to get a satellite phone, and the same thing. He's dependent on infrastructure that could go down, whereas the only infrastructure that might go down in the case of using a amateur radio on 2 meters might be a repeater, and there's always simplex. Now, I will give the guy credit for this. He did, the title is kind of clickbait. You know, he's making you think that he's saying that there's no use for amateur radio at all. And he does say in the video that he's going to also continue to use amateur radio. That is, I think maybe sounds like he considers it more of a backup for him than for the Starlink. But it is kind of clickbait. You know, he sounds like he's trying to say that Starlink is going to kill amateur radio. You know, it's going to go away because of something like Starlink. And, you know, I don't think that's going to happen. But yet he also goes on to say that he's not totally giving up on amateur radio. You know, kind of makes it clickbait if you get the idea there. So I think Josh did a pretty good job in his video of defending ham radio, so to speak. And he didn't bash this guy for what he had to say. And I'm not trying to really bash him either. I'm just pointing out where I disagree with him. And so anyway, I just wanted to kind of, I guess you would say, defend amateur radio. I don't think Starlink or satellite phones or some other things like that are going to totally take the place of amateur radio, even when it comes to emergency communications. I think there's still a place for amateur radio in times of emergency communications. And so I just kind of wanted, I guess, to defend amateur radio in that aspect. So that's about all I have to say about that, at least for now. Till next time, 73 everyone.